How's everybody's conference been? Good. Thank you. Thanks for coming. It's been phenomenal for me too. Is this too loud? But okay, because for a lot of you, you've seen me talk before, and two things come out of that. I tend to get really loud, so if I start screaming and you need me to like calm down a little bit, just let me know. And number two, I like to hear myself talk. So as a incentive, if you guys all want to agree to give me all green cards to let you out 5 minutes early to get to the drinks first, we can negotiate that. Okay? All right, let's get this party started. So I typed the wrong conference in on the slide, so if you're here for the IBAD conference, it's already over. But I was talking about the IBAD conference earlier, and so when I was typing this up, I kind of forgot and put the wrong conference in there. So ignore typos. I did not test drive these slides. Okay. Today I want to talk about, I think it's a very agile topic. It's the topic of relationships. Okay. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm a coach. And if you're wondering why I chose this slide, it is not the obvious similarity, rugged good looks, and all that. But I do want you to keep in mind that this guy is also a coach. So this is me, okay? The credentials, the bar is pretty low to be a coach. So, but the reason I'm here to talk to you today is I went through and I've been on all kinds of projects. Unfortunately, way too many unsuccessful projects. But then I've been on quite a few successful projects. And so as I went through my career and I've been on all these projects, I noticed something. Some of these failures were waterfall. In fact, a lot of them were, quite frankly. But then I also was on a couple of waterfall projects that were like, we knocked it out of the park. And so as I sat back and reflected on all these projects that went really well and all these projects that didn't go really well, I'm like, wait a second, the Agile community told me that you can't succeed with waterfall. Isn't that what the Agile community tells you? This is the only way to develop software. And we will certify you to prove it. Okay? So then I was on these Agile projects. And I've been on some super successful Agile projects. And I know nobody in this room suffers from this, but I've also been on some super dysfunctional Agile projects. Right? And I attribute it to the coaching style of the coach. So as I reflect on all this, I say, okay, so what's the common denominator here, right? And for me, when I start thinking about the common denominator, I think about relationships. Those waterfall projects, all the teams got along really well, and they solved problems together, and they teamed, and they did all that stuff, right? On the same token, the Agile projects were in the same way. So kind of the way I look at it is relations are what ship software. It's how you interact with your peers, how you interact with your other team, how you interact with your customers. That's what's going to make or break your project, not what life cycle you decide to follow. Whether it's safe, whether it's Scrum at scale, whether it's just plain old Scrum or XP. I don't like to say this, but I've even seen XP projects fail, that's really hard to do. Sorry, that's my plug for XP. Okay, so the question is, if we want to get better, maybe we need to start focusing on relationships with each other and our peers and our stakeholders, and spend a little less time worrying about whether we are, hey, excuse me, can we table that conversation in stand-up till after stand-up, 16th minute? Those kinds of things aren't helping us deliver software. Have you guys ever been in a stand-up and you get into the whole like stuff that's not supposed to be talked about in stand-up? What's the best part of stand-up? The stuff that you're not supposed to talk about in stand-up, right? That's what you get the most value out of, but you get hushed. No, we can't talk about that, right? So I think we need to focus more on how we build relationships and work together, okay? And that's how it's going to help you be successful as a team and as an organization. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, let's get physical for a moment. Okay? That was awesome back in the day. Okay? Maybe we're not going to get physical. Maybe physical is the wrong word. But let's get spiritual for a second. Okay? How many people know what the golden rule is? A lot of people? Okay, what's the golden rule? The treat others thing is too like old world for me. I can't say it. So treat people the way you want to be treated. Is that a good like Iowa way to like say that? Treat people the way you want to be treated. Okay? So how many people feel like that's a good rule to live by? Yeah, it's pretty good. What do you think if we were to all live by that rule? What do you think this world would be like? Nirvana? Yeah? Well, guess what? I think the world would be exactly the way it is today. Because I think the golden rule is crap. Okay? Because if you think about it, don't we all kind of, like, when we treat people the way we want to be treated, what we're doing is we're ignoring the fact that people are different than us. And we want everybody to be just like us. Because we follow the golden rule. And we're going to treat people the way we want to be treated, which is basically saying, I don't care how you feel. I don't care about you. I want you to believe and act the way I like to believe and act. Okay? So, what about this guy? What's that? Platinum. How many people know what the platinum rule is? What's the platinum rule? Treat people the way they want to be treated. So I personally think that the secret to better relationships at work and better teams is to stop applying the golden rule and start applying the platinum rule in everything we do. Okay? So instead of putting our beliefs on other people and the way we feel you should act on other people, we should respect the way other people want to be treated. All right. Does that make sense? Any scary contradictions to that? Any debates that we could get into? Because that would be kind of fun. Okay, so the question is, how do you do that? So what I want to do for the rest of this time, and feel free to engage with questions and like comments and examples and those kinds of things. What I want to do the rest of the time is I want to just give everybody like some little tidbits that maybe you could think about and take back when you look at the interactions that you have at work. Okay? So one technique you can use is called mirroring. Now, that's the only physical technique, because I'm sure when you said, let's get physical, you were thinking we should like throw down in the conference room over this feature or that feature. But this is really the only physical thing. How many people are familiar with mirroring, the psychology thing, right? Yeah, quite a few people. So for those of you who don't, like our brains have these things called mirror neurons, and we unconsciously basically we copy other things. So has anybody ever been watching TV, one of those like blooper reels or whatever, and you see somebody like fall and hit their knee? What happens to you? You flinch, you feel it in your knee, right? That's because you're visualizing something and then your brain basically simulates that. Or if you've ever been, have you ever noticed in a debate, you're debating somebody pretty heavily, right? Have you ever noticed that somebody might like start going like this and raise their hand up? And then what do you do if they're doing that to you? Do you raise your hand up? Right? So that's mirroring. Okay? Now why is that important? Well, you can use mirroring, physical mirroring of people to create rapport. So like if you're going to talk to somebody and they're like, if you're talking to me, I'm probably going to be like super kicked back in my flips and like chilling out. Well, if you sit up like totally straight when you're talking to me, that's not going to build as much rapport as if you're a little more relaxed. So if you start watching people that you're interacting with and understanding kind of like how they're, if they're making if they're kind of being contemplative and doing this kind of thing, and I know it sounds cheesy, but if you kind of do this little head turn thing, that's going to build rapport, right? And that's going to connect, you're going to be able to connect with them a little better, because what you're basically doing is you're saying, hey, I can be like you. You're giving them a signal, a subtle signal. Okay? Does that make sense? Have you guys seen this before? Another thing you can do when people are having a bad day, smile. And you ever notice when people smile at you and make eye contact with you, it's hard to not smile back, at least a little bit? Yeah, that's the same concept, right? So that's mirroring. So that's one technique you can use. Another golden rule, platinum rule thing is, I'm bad about this too, I try. By the way, all of these things I suck at, but I have to keep practicing and keep trying. Going back to Linda's thing this morning, right? So I got this stupid watch, right? And I love my stupid watch. But ever since I got the stupid watch, there's something about having my phone in my pocket. If I get a text or something, I don't reach in my pocket and pull my phone out, because that's rude. But now that I have this watch, the thing vibrates and I go, and I look at the watch. It just happens, and But so the first thing is show the people that you respect them by not being distracted by all these things. Make sure your attention's focused on them, right? Once again, we shouldn't have to say these things, but I think it's a good reminder sometimes, because we're always getting distracted by different things going on in our environment, right? So be present. Okay? This one's big for me. I noticed this a long time ago. So the golden rule way, if we're trying to get somebody to like maybe change, like here I've got TDD, is we're trying to get somebody to adopt TDD, or we're trying to make some decision. So my natural tendency is like, bro, if we do TDD, man, the quality's going to go through the roof and all those kinds of things, right? You guys have maybe said that this is how important this thing is for us. And the problem with that is you're espousing that quality is really important, right? Well, do you think that the person you're talking to finds quality as important as you? Maybe, maybe not, right? So the thing is, maybe that person that you're talking to doesn't give a lick about quality. Maybe what that person likes to do and what's important to them is family time and all these kinds of things, right? You know, this is not a bad thing, but maybe what's important to them is stable income and a steady paycheck. So as long as they can continue to be employed, even if they don't do TDD, then talking about quality till you're blue in the face isn't going to build that relationship. They're just going to get annoyed with you, right? So what if we started talking about, hey, we should adopt TDD, because when I was doing it at this last company, the number of times I got paged and had to like miss my kid's soccer game went way down. Are they going to listen to that more, or are they going to listen to the quality drum? What are they going to respond to more? In my experience, they're going to respond to the things that are important to them, right? So we can still send the same message of TDD is good and all these great things. However, the way we message that, we need to message that in order to their values, in order to align with their values rather than ours. I have an example of this. I was at a company and we were talking about architecture training because we were trying to decentralize the architecture, because you know, in a lot of companies there's the big centralized architecture and then they become a bottleneck. And so what we did is they said, oh, we can do this training program and then push all this architecture and design skills down to the team. And I said, that's great. And they said, yeah, we'll do that. And I said, it's not going to work. And they said, well, why not? And I said, because we have a lot of people here that are only here for the paycheck and only here till they retire. And they said, what? We have amazing people here. I said, I did not say you don't have amazing people here. I said, but what's important to a lot of these folks isn't necessarily what's important to you. And they said, no, we disagree. So they went and they had training and they put everybody through training, all this architecture and design training. And then we came back and I said, how effective was the training? And we talked about how effective the training was. And it wasn't. And they said, well, there was a few people that picked it up and like ran with it and it's working really well, but there's a lot that didn't. And can you guess which ones were the ones that didn't? The people that their values, they don't care about design and architecture. And I keep picking on the paycheck people and that kind of stuff, but it's not, again, that's not intended to be like any, that's okay, that's a valid value. If that's what's important to you, that's fine. I'm not judging that. But they don't give a hoot about architecture and design. So we put this big program together and we trained all these people and took them away from delivering features and delivering product, and we put them through training that lasted about 2 days because they forgot promptly about it as soon as they were done because that's not something that's important to them. Does that make sense? So understanding your team's values and your coworkers and stakeholders' values is going to be really important to help you message these conversations about change. Okay, this one I like to call throwing your butt in their face. If it gets better, folks. If you went to Coop's talk, you probably already talked about this. What's the word but do to somebody? Shuts them down, right? So think about any argument with you, or I'm sorry, argument, enthusiastic discussion with your spouse, your coworkers, and as soon as you say something, they say, but you immediately stop, right? You start formulating the response to them. Now, the best way to respond to that is say, instead of saying, but what if we don't land the account, say, and what are the impacts if we don't land the account? And so now you can get the same message across, but when you're adding to the story, and so you won't shut the conversation down, you just continue to build on it. And they can respond and you can keep going. Now, one caveat, I get called out on this a lot. They say, Brandon, you say to stop throwing your butt around. And I don't. I mean, I do, I guess, but there's 2 times. You can throw a butt in your own face, and you got to be really limber to do that. But you can throw your butt in your own face, just don't throw your butt in other people's faces, right? So you could say, it's not shutting down a conversation if you say, well, I was thinking X, Y, Z, but I don't know if that's going to work. Notice that's like self-correcting, so that's not going to shut the conversation down like throwing it in somebody else's face. And so I did trademark throw your butt in their face, just in case you're wondering. Does that make sense? Okay. This is more of an inclusion thing and not singling out people. So there's been all these times where I go into a client and I'll see people talking about how to implement a feature or something, and then I'll hear something like, I'm trying to understand your code. Now what's that tell a developer? Yeah, you suck, right? And by the way, this statement is most frequently found with anybody, or uttered when anybody's looking at commits that say be Carlson on them. That's usually when that comes out. So what that does is that singles somebody out, right? So what we want to do is we want to be more inclusive. So it's better to use like a little more general term like our code, right? Because now people think you're in it with them and they're not saying, well, there's your stuff and then there's my stuff, right? Which I don't know if you guys have ever interacted with other departments. Like, how many DBAs we have in here? Perfect. Like the DBAs, right? Whenever you're interacting with the DBAs, is it ever an our conversation, like we're trying to do this together, or is it always an us versus them thing? Well, I think we perpetuate that because we're constantly, when we go talk to people, we're saying, I was looking at your thing. When are you going to be able to get this done? What if we said, when are we going to be able to get this done? Would that be a little less standoffish? Right? So, favor like the we versus you kind of conversations, and that's going to go a long way. Okay, this one's great. I didn't know how to put this on a paper, but to keep your sanity you might have to redefine what success looks like in a conversation. So what do I mean by that? Well, when we're talking about solutions, I might come and I might say something to somebody and say like, I think XYZ would be a good way to approach this. And what do you think my peer says that I'm working with? That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. It's interesting, but that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. In fact, Tim Gifford did that to me like an hour before this. But here's the thing. In a lot of cases, when we're debating at work about some of these decisions that we're trying to make, right? What ends up happening a lot of times is that it becomes a stalemate. And so for me, sometimes to keep my sanity and understand that some of these conversations, these relationships take a lot of time to build. You don't build a relationship in one conversation. So my idea of success is when Gifford told me, that's interesting, but you're batshit crazy, the fact that he said it was interesting means that I won, right? So sometimes we have to put our pride aside and be like, he said it was interesting, so maybe there's something to that. And then the worst thing ever happens. He's going to come to me 2 days from now, and what's he going to say? That's a really, really stupid idea. Here's 5 different reasons that this will never work. And then what do? I jump up and down because I had him thinking about this crap for 2 days. So there must be something there, right? So you have to realize the subtle things, and the subtle wins that you're having when you're building these relationships and building trust with these folks. That's my point with this story, right? Don't try to win. Set your ego aside. Look for the cues that they're giving you, that they're taking in the information. And remember, a lot of introverts, right? A lot of introverts tend to talk, or they tend to process, and then eventually they get a whole thing in their mind, and then they'll talk. And then there's people like me that just start talking, and eventually we figure out what we're trying to say, right? So, sometimes we need to talk to those folks and understand that they need the time to go soak on things instead of just trying to drive them to a decision or drive them to an answer, right? Okay? That definitely keeps you sane. Okay. Listen for cues. This one I think is really interesting. I found this to be somewhat hit and miss, but generally speaking, I find this to work pretty well. So you tell somebody something or talk to them about an idea, and they say, well, the way I see it is that if we do that, then this other thing might happen. Right? Have you heard somebody say something like that? Okay. Well, when I hear somebody say, the way I look at it, the way I see it, those are cues for me to say, maybe we need to go to a whiteboard. This person's using words like look and see, and so they're using a lot of visual language. And so maybe a better way to communicate the idea with them is to meet them where they're at and use their style, which is probably more visual. Like I said, this doesn't always work, but it's fairly repeatable. Likewise, what are you going to do if somebody says, well, I just feel like X? Are we going to take them to the whiteboard? Or are we going to show them a bunch of data? I wouldn't do either. Wrong. He got it wrong. This is recorded. So when I have somebody say I feel like this, I know they're probably a little more intuitive, right? So what I'm not going to do is go apply a bunch of data on top of them and say, hey, look at all the data, right? Now, however, if they say I think, or, I have a theory, right? Then I might take a little more analytical approach to the problem because they kind of are using that kind of analytical language. And then now that you're speaking their language, you're more likely to connect with each other and understand each other. Okay? All right. There's another thing that is a little harder these days in the modern open environments and stuff, but this one, looking for clues or cues. Okay? So you go and you're trying to have a discussion with somebody and they feel like they just won't listen. You know, sometimes you walk by that person's desk, and if all you see plastered throughout the desk are all of their certifications and all of their degrees, and their kids, every picture of their child has a sports trophy in it, what do you think that says about that person? Bonus points if somebody says fixed mindset, but achievement, competition, that's a big deal, right? So is that person going to respond to you being right better than they're going to respond to themselves being right? Probably not, right? So if you know that person is competitive, you're probably going to want to take a little different approach to talking to that person, and this is terrible, but you're probably going to want to make sure whatever happens, they win that conversation, right? Because are they going to like working with you better if you like try to throw the mental smackdown on them and win every conversation you're in? It's probably not going to endear them to you, right? So sometimes it's a good idea with some of those folks to just keep quiet, right? Make sense? Likewise, let's say that person has like a lot of they're more interested in maybe family pictures and some of those kinds of things, and you can tell they're more of maybe they've got all their friends. I've seen this where the pictures on their desk is them on girls' weekend in Vegas, or they were out on the couples trip. The whole family's all got together. These are people that are probably a little bit more collaborative and a little bit more they like the interaction with people in the group stuff, right? So they're probably not going to be as combative. They're probably going to be more inclusive and more interested in, discussing things and working together to solve problems, right? So you can see that in a lot of places if you start kind of looking at their desk and looking the way they do some of these things, right? Now again, with the open spaces, a lot of times people these days don't have pictures all over because they don't have a cube anymore. Maybe they have a locker, and you can't go I guess I could get you, if you wanted, let me know and I'll get you a lockpick set, and you can go and open up people's lockers when they go home and see what happens. But, all right? All right. Hello. All right. Systems thinking. So with systems thinking, we're really talking about the big picture of a solution, right? We're not just talking about a spot. And I think a lot of times what we tend to do is we tend to look at the problems with our lens on, right? And we don't think about that person we're interacting. What are all the impacts to that person of making this change? We might think from an organization perspective we think it's the best, but we need to look at all the impacts of that person holistically, not just from the perspective of the organization. Which kind of reminds me of a discussion I had to facilitate not too long ago. They said, what we need to do is we just need to decide what's best for the organization and move forward with that. And I said, that's not going to work. And they said, why not? That's what we should be doing. And I said, because that's what we're doing now. Every person in this room thinks that what they want to do is the best for the organization. That's why we're arguing about it, right? Nobody goes to work and says, I'm going to screw up as much as I can, our organization that pays my bills and is going to offer me retirement. I'm going to just screw that all up. That's not how this works. Anyway, so understanding the impact on that person personally is really important so that you don't drive things down that's going to have a negative impact on them. Then they're going to be much happier if that's the case. And then you don't have to smile to get them to smile when they're grouchy because they'll just smile anyway, right? All right. Oh, we probably have all done all this lean manufacturing garbage that they keep talking about. And you've probably heard the 5 whys, right? What's the 5 whys? We ask why 5 times to get at the root cause. Has anybody ever been in a discussion? I think this is more pertinent in a domestic relationship than a work relationship. However, I do see it at work as well. How many people, maybe I'll tell a personal story about that and see if anybody relates, guys. Hey, look, I did the dishes. Why did you do it that way? You ever had that conversation? I know you have. Why did you do it that way? What's your initial reaction with that conversation? I did something wrong. It did not meet the expectations of the other person that asked me why. And unfortunately, that happens to us a lot, right? Happens to us a lot. Have you ever, even in a work situation, when somebody says, why did we do that? Or why did you do that? Is that ever a positive? No, it's generally, it's kind of like the throwing your butt in their face, right? You immediately get this like sense of, don't judge me, right? So abolish what and why from your vocabulary. So what do you do instead? Well, what I'll do is when somebody says something that, quite frankly, is crazy, I'll say, oh, cool, tell me more about how we got to there, or got to that point. And now, instead of questioning them and shutting them down, what I'm basically doing is we are sending the message that, hey, I want to understand more of where you're coming from on this. I want to learn more about your thought process with this. Which is essentially the same thing that we're trying to get to with why. But when I say tell me more, it keeps people disarmed and it doesn't rile people up. Have you seen that before? I think this one's pretty big. I use this a lot. Because I was in these discussions and people would say, why this, why that, and I could just tell I would get frustrated, right? And it's like, wait a second. When I start saying, tell me about it, people kind of disarm and then they get to tell their story, right? And even introverts, even though everybody would argue me, everybody loves to tell their story, right? So, okay. I have an admission. We might need to pause the camera. I don't know if this can be publicized. I do not believe in work-life balance. How many people agree with me? Yeah, there's a couple. So why don't I agree with work-life balance? Well, all jokes aside, there's 24 hours in a day, right? And with the 24 hours in a day, 8 of those you are sleeping. Except for Danielle, who just had an adorable little baby, and so she sleeps about 3 hours a night. So, generally speaking, though, we'll say on average we sleep 8 hours a night. So that leaves us 16 hours, right? And then we spend 8 hours of our day. That's assuming that you don't count commute time and those things. We'll just, again, keep it simple. 8 hours a day working, right? And then you have 8 hours a day lifing, right? If you did not work, would your life be the same? No? So, but we can't not work. Well, we could, but it wouldn't be a great life, right? So we work to fund a life, right? And then we have like these little devices in our pockets that beeps anytime the system goes down, and it's never between 9 to 5. It's always between 9 to 5 p.m. to a.m., right? So we're constantly checking email. We have a bad day at home. Does that flow into work the next day? Yeah. If we have a bad day at work, does that flow home? Oh, the black eyes my kids had. Sorry. Poor taste? So this idea that there is such thing as a work-life balance is flawed, right? It's just fundamentally flawed. It is your life. You spend way too much time at work. Half of your waking hours are at work to try to say that you can just put that aside. That's all part of your life. The work funds what life you want, right? So this crazy talk with work-life balance. So why do we avoid having personal conversations and building personal relationships at work? We need personal relationships at work. It helps build trust and it helps build those relationships. So ask your coworkers what's important to them, what they did on the weekend. Ask it, because that's how you build these things, okay? We got to stop with this work is separate than life thing. Now, I get that some people are a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, what's that? Yeah, and they don't want to share, and that's okay. If you're working with somebody that does not, and they're compartmentalizing, and they don't want to talk about personal stuff at work, the golden rule would say, damn it, Brandon said I'd be better at creating a relationship if I forced them to talk about, no, that's not it, right? If they don't like to talk about that stuff, you don't talk about that stuff. But very rarely have I run into somebody that doesn't want to tell me about their kid's soccer game this weekend if I ask, right? People want to talk about that stuff. So it's important to talk about it, okay? So kind of the crux of this is that you're not the center of the universe. So we can't project the way we want people to behave and the way we want people to be onto other people. We need to go where those people are and work with them where they want to be, okay? Another thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately, bonus content, just came to mind, is if you think about it, I think part of this golden rule problem that we have is we all want to be heroes, right? Everybody wants to be a hero. But I think the best relationship builders and the best people that can get things done in their organization, you're not Luke Skywalker. You didn't blow up the Death Star and single-handedly, save the rebellion, right? The people that do the best at relationship building and influencing organizations, in my experience, is Obi-Wan. They're the people that are the Obi-Wans of the world. They're the mentors. They're the people come and listen and say, you know what, how can I make you the hero? I'm not going to come in and be the hero, and I don't want to have to come and say, here's the solution, and it's my solution, it's beautiful, and it's going to save the world, and then you can come and pat me on the back afterwards, right? Realistically, we all need to be Obi-Wan Kenobis, because he was there, he was very influential, he gave Luke the confidence to pull the trigger, right? He says, I can't go, I've got to take care of the farm and all that kind of stuff, right? But Obi-Wan was there to support Luke in the journey. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that we need to do within our organizations to build relationships, is realize we're here to support everybody else's journey and not be Luke Skywalker. Does that make sense? All right. So, relationships matter. My goal here was to just give you a hodgepodge of tidbits and things that I've used over the years with my consulting. And I think I've done a pretty decent job of making relationships with people. And so hopefully, you can take some of this away. And I promised I'd go fast so that we could drink. And I'm 20 minutes early. Any questions? Yeah.
A lot of this seems to be dependent on mechanics of the unconscious person.
Yeah.
What happens when that person is also conscious of this, and now instead of being a person trying to build rapport, you're a person that seems like they're trying to manipulate?
Yeah. Okay. So the question was, a lot of this stuff seems to work on unconscious people, but now that everybody in this room is wise and informed, it'll never work on me. That's not really what you asked, but it's pretty much a summary, right? So yeah, I think there's a couple of things on that. I think I occasionally notice when it's being done to me, but I also don't think I care. Because I think the difference between, manipulation is your intent. And if you're doing that to me, going back to my hero metaphor, if you're doing that to me so you can be the hero, I think that's manipulation. If you're doing that to me so that you can help me be successful, I think it's totally fine, right? So I think there could be that aspect of it. I also think that when you look at some of this kind of stuff, so a lot of people have imposter syndrome, right? So when I first started coaching and I work with people, I'll say, hey, I think you could be a coach. And they're like, oh, I don't know enough TDD, or I don't know enough, C++ or whatever to go do that. And I think what you'll find is that your imposter syndrome's getting in the way, and there's way fewer people that are aware and you're going to offend. You're going to help more people than you're going to offend, let's put it that way. Because like coaching, I'll go in and I'll coach on a programming language I've never done before. But they're not asking me to help with the language stuff. They already know the language stuff. They don't know the techniques and the tools and things like that. And so I'm there to just show them the techniques. And there's actually, you don't have to be, the best. You have to be good enough that you can provide value to the people you're working with. And so I think that even though you guys all know this now, I think you'll find that there are a million people out there that don't, and at risk of offending one person or two people, go for it. So, anything else? Yeah.
Can you tell me more about...
Yes! Nice. Now he's manipulating me. This is crap.
Can you talk about, though, this is on a very individual level, but how do you maybe do some of the stuff that you're talking about between teams?
So, teams don't have relationships. People have relationships. So I'm going to answer you with a non-answer. This is my way of avoiding your question. Is I think realistically, teams don't have relationship with each other. People have relationship with each other. So when you start looking at teams, if you have teams that are not getting along well, I think you start with the individuals on the team. And you say, hey, let's build a relationship with one of these people. So at least we have a voice over on that team. That then the idea would be we eventually, get to the point where we get along as teams too. Spy, infiltrate, yes, yeah. That sounds manipulative, doesn't it? Yeah. But I do think though that like within your team, if you learn these, I'd encourage you to learn these kinds of things or practice with these, and then see how the interactions change with people. I think you'd be surprised. Another thing, this stuff is hard to change because we've been throwing our butts in people's faces for, 40 years, 50 years, right? This is just the way we communicate a lot of times. And so what I would also recommend is, don't worry about getting it right. So if you just try to catch yourself. You catch yourself throwing your butt in somebody's face, you're like, after you're done with the conversation, you go, oh, I just mooned them 5 times in that conversation, right? But start by catching yourself. And then once you start to become more self-aware of a lot of these things, then you can start worrying about behavior change. I think awareness is the first thing. Because you're just going to you're going to be in the heat of a conversation, all this stuff's going to just roll out, right? So, anything else? We had 2 people say, this dude is droning on way too long with these questions, I need a drink, and left. So, I don't know. Anything else? All right, thanks.